and everybody in the audience that can hear me, sonically speaking, no one knew that I was coming here. But I tell you, if you have any friends, they need to come and sit down next to you. This is going to probably be the best panel of the show, sonically speaking.
So we're going to talk today about studio design, acoustics, and monitoring for today's music production. And I've got this incredible panel here. We're going to just introduce ourselves quickly to get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm Dave Malikpour. I'm the president of and founder of Professional Audio Design, Malikpour Design Partners, Osberger Monitors, and Studio Float. And I've been in this business for about 33 years. Started Pro Audio Design about, what'll be 30 years in January. We got Rafa Sardina on our panel. There's very few people who have 18 Grammy Awards, and I don't know, is it like 30 or 40 nominations on top of that? So, and what I love about Rafa is he's probably the biggest gear junkie of anybody I've ever known. He's got more gear lying around the floor that he's not using than most studios have in multiple rooms. So, has our Duo 8 speakers in his studio. That's how we came to know each other, and definitely makes amazing records. And he uses his Grammy Awards as a phone, actually, so he can, phone home and, make the deal. Almost without need of introduction, we got Jason Joshua. Again, unbelievable mix engineer, owns Canton House Studios that we designed and built over about a year ago, and came through the Dave Pensado channel originally, working at Larrabee, and I think has one of the most powerful voices in today's music, mixing some of the greatest records out there. And this is a shot of his beautiful studio with a console that we helped develop with all the best toys. A little bit of a view. To Jason's right, we have Anthony Cruz. He goes by Cruz. He's the CEO of Break It Down Entertainment, one of the guys out there who's really doing a lot for our industry, trying to help people learn, but also as Meek Mill's engineer. We came to know each other when he worked with Rock Nation on the studio Rock the Mic that we built, just about, 2006, 7?
Yeah, early
It's hard to
2000.
2010. He graduated from Full Sail and has a really relevant experience because he's all over the place working in studios everywhere. And also just, really positive person and influencing others. And then to his right, we've got Michael Bashangi. He's my partner. He's an architect and design project manager that oversees every part of our design projects. And we're going to start showing some of the work that we do together. And just to give you an idea, this is the Rock Nation listening room in LA, what we designed in combination with Willow Perone interior designers. And just some of the work that went into that, some renderings and acoustics. To my right is Luis Roquette Valdez. He's the general manager, but also the head of technology for Jocavi Acoustic Panels. And they provide acoustic services in every one of our jobs. They help us model the rooms, working with me on what we want to have. They then test those models and create some incredible data on how the room's going to perform. And so rather than just guessing what materials are going to sound like in a room, what we try to do is, using those predictive models, use materials that are also modeled so we can then put in that model until we get the balance that we're seeking. Jocavi also does everything from venue acoustics to, project studio acoustics or, whole rooms. They're based out of Portugal, and I think they're actually the best acoustics products that I've found in my 30 years of doing this. So I want to start by asking you guys, what are the key things you look for in a studio? And I guess I want to hand that question first to Cruz, who's working at studios all over the place. What's the most important things that you look for, Cruz?
Number one is your monitors. Honestly, I actually, yesterday I got the typical last minute call. My guy wanted to get in the studio and everything's booked up. AES kind of taking over in the city. And I found an alternative studio that I won't name the monitors they have, but they don't have, Osberger monitors. And the vibe was incredible there, really cool, like secret doors and all kind of like really cool stuff. And I didn't even get a response back and kind of just went on about my night, because he needs that vibe more than anything of really hearing the music with that energy that your monitors bring. And so I'm not saying that because I'm on your panel. That's just literally what I have to deal with my client.
That was for Meek Mill.
Yes, for me. Sorry. Also, just vibe is important because we're stuck in these four walls for 8 to 12 hours, sometimes more. So as important as it is to have sound and really cool gear and plugins, the vibe in the room and that you're going to be stuck in for a while is important so that you're not driving yourself crazy. You don't want the room to be too sterile. You don't want it to look like a hospital. You want it to have kind of vibe, mood lighting, and there's studios that have like really cool wallpaper and all kind of different little things that add to the vibe. We put like our Santeria candles and stuff. That comes from my Spanish background, but I got Meek on it. So
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
So Rafa, could I ask you, because you have your own studios, but you also work, like I see you, like I'm in the Czech Republic this week, or I'm in Chile, or and you're working in a bedroom one day and a unbelievable concert hall the next, or your own layer.
I agree with Cruz. We're in the business of creating emotions, right, and helping other people create those emotions. And I think that the vibe is the most important thing. The moment you step into a room, actually, here in the audience, we have one of the best vibe creators I ever encountered, Dave Righteous. I used to go to the record plant all the time. I will be in 3, he will be in 4 or whatever, or vice versa. And he has the greatest vibe creating, He actually used to bring his own road case with the stuff. And I think it's super important. I was just working in Madrid in a studio. That's the coldest environment. And it was so hard. It was so hard to make people comfortable. Just to make your artist comfortable. It was really, really, really hard. For example, they didn't even have dimmers for the, and I'm talking about an amazing studio, one of the biggest in Europe, and they didn't even have dimmers for the lights. It was either on or off. It was that aspect was actually quite terrible, and people don't understand how important that is. And obviously, once you walk in, the monitors are the most important thing. The monitors are your ears. So, yeah.
Jason, could you obviously were parked at Larrabee for years, but you also, worked in other studios along the way. Could you, your input, what do you think the most important things are when you're looking in a studio project or creating?
I'm not really a big main guy. Like, I really don't go on the mains until my clients need to hear it. So I bring my monitors wherever I go. So I'm agreeing with them, but saying that it doesn't matter what the studio has because I'm bringing my monitors in. So the main thing for me is if the room's telling the truth or not. And if the room's telling the truth, then I don't care if there's lights on, lights off. That is the most important thing in the world, because you'll be in a room thinking you're dialing in the greatest mix in the world, and then you go do a test somewhere else or listen in your headphones. You're like, what did I just do? Like, what am I listening to right now? So the room telling me the truth is the main thing. And I think if we all had to choose between a really vibey studio like said, like, oh, it was amazing, but our ears are used to Asperger's, and once you've become an Asperger ear, it's hard to change. Like, I've listened to every speaker known to man, and my ear just gets drawn to that Asperger horn. So those two things of the room telling the truth, and then when I do go up top, I don't understand any other speaker than Asperger, so I'm looking for definitely a room that has Asperger speakers.
Well, we love to hear that, but one of the things I remember in working with you is that you carry around those ATCs, right? And you told me that in different rooms they sounded different, right? And so even though you're comfortable with that speaker, the room itself is actually, that's like the track that you're putting your car on, right? The speaker is the car, and the room is the track. And if the track isn't well groomed, the speaker can't perform.
Yeah, everyone here probably all has mixes that we lean to when we go into a room that we don't know, and we play just to get used to the room. And if you do bring your own speakers to that room and you're so used to that record and you know exactly how that record sounds, then you can see where the room's lying to you at. know what I mean? So that's really, really, really important.
Do you find a difference in between the classic commercial studio rooms and new environments where people are building and houses like you have? Both of you two have studios in your houses, or using rental, temporary spaces, posting up in Malibu or in a mansion. People are recording in all kinds of places. How do you see that affecting your work?
It is a challenge because it forces you to prepare more, to get there. Like Jason was saying, make sure, that your listening environment is correct, that you can hear everything, play your playlist of references and know what your boundaries are, and also detect bad things in the room, which happens all the time. And until you play back and you get used to, using some tricks, playing it loud, stopping the music, see if there are any weird resonances that you're not aware of, basic stuff, and, playing around with. There's only so much you can play around with. But for example, when I was producing an album in Bogota, Colombia this past year, I had to actually move how they had set the controllers and everything farther back in the room because it actually did sound terrible. Where they had been working like this for over a year, and it really sounded like outrageously terrible. There was something weird. I couldn't spot it, so I started just moving the stands. I didn't move everything else, but just start moving the stands farther back, and then I found the sweet spot. It's oh, now I can really understand what's happening, and it forced us to move everything else. They were in panic, oh my God, now we have to move everything, the cabling, everything. They spent half a day to do it, but it was worth it because we're going to be working in this room for 3 weeks. So, and even if you are going to be working only for 2 days, it's worth spending the extra time.
That brings up something about monitoring. So when I'm tuning a room, when I worked on Dave's Pensado's room, I spent 3 hours just on the positioning of the speakers before we got into actually tuning the room, because so much happens in just the angling and finding that drive point. Cruz, you've posted up a lot in non-traditional places. I remember this place you had me send a pair of Osbergers to some Malibu beach house, and they're using the closet as an ISO booth. When you make tracks like that, are you as confident in the results that you're getting? Can you trust what you're hearing?
I'll be honest with you. In those environments, I'm more concerned with making sure his vibe is right. I'm not necessarily using those rooms, even if they're your monitors or whoever's, as mix rooms. I just want to make sure I get the best vocal I can possibly capture in that environment. Putting up moving blankets and all kind of just creative ways of getting the cleanest vocal and taking them to environments that I trust to do the final mixes.
That makes sense. Jason, I know you're getting the results of these recordings that are made in non-traditional environments. How does that affect the mixing process and your, the time investment and the way the tracks are being organized?
He loves it.
Does that mean because you can bill more, or?
No. Actually, it's a pandemic right now with that. I think technology has afforded a lot of us to cheat the art, so to speak. Easily find kind of where you need to be with your sound and hit a preset and so on and so forth. For example, you have someone like Cruz, who's the top of his game, and he goes to a Malibu house, he's still going to have the best mic. He's still going to get that vocal, and that vocal is going to be cut. I don't care what that closet looks like. It's going to be baffled and all that and it's going to be like a major recording studio. However, there's other people out there that don't have the ear like that and don't know what a great vocal sounds like. So they'll have that same hookup in the house using a Mac mic, going into something terrible, back into something terrible. And then when you get the vocal, you're like, and then you see 17 plugins on it, and you're like, yeah, they needed 17 plugins to get this back to a palatable listening experience. So yeah, it's training. It's like if people can go back in time and just understand that some of these giants and some of these greats who've created, kind of like our template, because, the wheel hasn't been redesigned, you understand and you realize that over the years, slowly and surely, the art's being lost. So it's like, as engineers, as for us, it's like anytime we can help a younger engineer and like, how can you be a vocal engineer when you don't, or you haven't even heard what a great vocal sounds like? You know what I mean?
think-
Like early in my career when was working with Dave, I had no idea that I was terrible until I heard what great sounded like.
Yeah.
And once I heard what great sounded like every single day, my ear started getting trained to that, and then I can go off into my other like things that I think should be different in the mix and so on and so forth. But like, you know, it's a fact of just training your ear to hear as many good things as you possibly can, because that'll help you in those situations when you're in a room and you hear you're like, this doesn't sound like a great vocal. Can't be a great mixer unless you're at one time an avid, passionate, great tracking engineer. If that makes any sense. I think all of us up here have put in our time and our effort, and then when Cruz is mixing Meek or Rafa's mixing everything on the South American shores, you're getting something extremely. And I don't think I've ever told you this in person, man. You're one of my favorites. Always fucking amazing. So let's give check out Rafa's mixes. Unbelievable. I learned so much.
Well, one of the things I love about that particular thing that you're talking about with Rafa is that it's so broad. It's not just like I just make these rock records or I just make hip hop records. It spans an entire every genre, and I think that's what.
And that's what people don't know about Latin music. And Rafa, like with Latin music, I had to learn the hard way because I didn't know of the different rhythms. There's so many rhythms. So if you look at like American music, there's rock,
crazy.
there's
Yeah.
alternative, there's jazz, there's this, that. People don't understand. In Latin music, there's way more. It's so more open. You'll hear stuff like I've never even heard before, and you're like, this is Latin music? You're like, yeah, that's Latin music. But they have rock music as well. They have, bachata. There's so many, there's so many different rhythms that you have to pay attention to. So it's, his ear is impeccable.
No, I think it's a great thing, what's going on with Latin music, because before it was very sort of like typecast. It was just, there was like, it was kind of misunderstood, what it really was. And there is salsa, there is like Jason was saying, I mean, there's so much stuff. Even within a country, like, for example, Colombia, the amount of rhythms they have, from the West Coast, the East Coast, they are like completely different. It really is quite a learning experience. And then, for example, even in Europe, Portugal, what they do with.
Here we go.
I'm actually working with a Portuguese artist right now, and it's a completely different aesthetic, completely different. Musically speaking, is very, very different. And Spain with flamenco, I mean, there is a lot to be learned.
Well, I think that we could take that last statement. There's a lot to be learned and applied to every part of our industry. And I think one of the things I love about the people on this panel, everyone is in a receptive mode as well as in a teaching mode and as well as in a doing the work mode. I've been doing this 33 years, and every project I still learn something new. From the design to the speaker placement to the tuning to the personal experience of the listener. And I'm keyed in a lot to what when I was tuning for Rafa or for Jason. What are they hearing, and having a vocabulary to understand what sound is actually. So this learning experience, I think, as we go forward, I think being receptive is one of the most important tools that we have, instead of thinking I know anything. And I think anybody who's, gone from being an adolescent to an adult to a, middle-aged, you realize as you go, you think you start off knowing everything, and then you realize how little you know as you go. And I'm constantly reminded of what I don't know. To move into,
Not to cut you off, that's
No.
that's a gem that you gave. Like, it doesn't matter what size your room is. You can have the biggest studio in the world. You can have a bedroom. You can have a kitchen. Whatever it is, tune your room. Have it tuned. Saved up the money to make sure what you're hearing, because you're working behind the 8 ball if you don't. And what's so good about, and a good way to spot a great tuner is like Dave, where all of us, once Dave tunes the room and gets it to where he thinks you're going to like it, you bring out your favorite listening menu, and you play these records that you're so familiar with, and you'll catch Dave when you play your records that you're proud of because it's representing every frequency and it's a perfect mix, or your reference for you. He will steal that for his reference. You know, and that's really, 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 like when I saw him do that and playing other people's stuff, like, you know, he played stuff that Rafa did. And I was like, man, this sounds amazing. And the fact that his ear is, you know, and you want a tuner that has an ear similar to yours, even though they're basically getting you to your curve, you still need someone that has that feel. Because I mean, we all can agree that last 5% of tuning is the most important part. You know, once he gets it there, and now you're sitting in the chair and you're telling him, little 20K less if you can, or this more, and so on and so forth. If he's not feeling the record the same way you are, then you're in deep trouble. But I have a lot of friends who are big time mixers who are mixing out of their home now from the pandemic, and they don't want to move because they've, you know, I don't know how many bedrooms you've been in so far.
Lot.
No, and these are top guys.
Well, you know, in the tuning process, you know, when I'll use your example there when we were listening to some of the stuff that you've produced and mixed, and then listening to the things you referenced, like, you know, Piggy or, you know, Closer from Nine Inch Nails. Like, I learned from listening to the way he was listening to things that he was hearing, and that helped me identify things I needed to change playing back the mixes he was doing himself. And he actually put up some stuff he was working on at that moment, and we flipped over to stuff that had been mastered, and it's like, oh, this little thing is biting me at like 6K. And, you know, his first thing was, maybe we need to cut a couple dB around this range. And so instead of 2 dB, I took out 0.2 of a dB. And he's like, wow, that hit it. So I understand that people often say this, what sounds like 2 dB, actually, these systems are so responsive that a little bit goes a huge long way. And one of the things that's morphed in the technology today, in the tuning technology, is that, you know, we used to use third octave EQs like a white or a graphic EQ. And it's like the problems sometimes in rooms today that I'm correcting are minute. But because our ear identifies the leading tone, whatever's the loudest in that frequency response, our ear is going to hear as the loudest. So if you have a 2K spike that's 1 dB and it's a quarter of an octave wide, you're going to hear that louder than 6K. And you're going to hear it louder than 20K. So that's what I'm listening for when I listen to somebody's work. And I think, like, I know they didn't mean to put that 2K spike into the vocals, so let me correct it in the speaker. But we don't want the speaker putting bass in there that's not in the actual track, right? So because we don't want to add anything that we're not hearing. So this leads me to this other part of what we do in our process. And I'm going to say it this way. If you could hear and see your studio before it was built, how would that change your design choices? And I think each of you have different experience with that. But I'm going to actually just ask Luis, who does our modeling, to just, you know, in your side of it, you see a lot of rooms from all over the world, you know, from a bedroom to a symphony hall. How does that affect the way you approach it from a acoustic standpoint?
I've done all sorts of rooms. I mean, bedrooms, 20-foot containers, all sorts of issues. So I have to take an extremely scientific approach to things. I need to make sure I analyze the rooms properly, to analyze the materials of the rooms, the dimensions of the rooms, positioning. One of the things that we were talking about, the difference between using studios and using bedrooms and rental properties and stuff like that. I agree with all of you. The vibe is there, and you bring your. Last time you said you bring your plywood to put underneath the congas and stuff, and it does help. But there's always this thing that we can't forget: a studio is a work of love. It's the general accumulation of experiences and science, and that guys go in and try and listen, and they move the monitors like you did, and. You can't do that on a rental property. You can't do that on somewhere you go for 2 weeks. When you go to another place, you have to rethink the whole thing. You have to re-engineer the whole thing. And that's what we do. We do the science.
Not if you're Rafa.
Not if you're Rafa. He brings the plywood.
So
I bring the plywood and the
moves the
blankets.
speakers.
Cruz mentioned the blankets. I always bring
No.
blankets
Oh, yeah. Moving
everywhere.
The thing is, to you, I mean, you guys are especially great at what you do. But to the general public, a lot of people feel that a simple difference in the sound is actually something good. So they feel they've got this EQ, and suddenly they change. They feel a difference in the bass and 200 hertz, 100 hertz, and suddenly they feel, oh, this sounds great. but we know that actually that doesn't mean it sounds great. It just sounds different. It's a very difficult thing to perceive the actual change on an equalization to make it good or bad, and that's what we do. We have to rely on the science. We analyze these things. We run the numbers. There's the example of Jason's room that we're going to go through in a minute that came out perfect. I mean, Jason swears by it, I hope. And I have to do it like that because, well, I'm half deaf, so I have to do it like that. I have to run by the numbers, and the result needs to be what we want it to be.
You know, Jason, we got a chance a lot to look at your room as we developed it, and in a lot of ways, even though we designed it, you also designed it, right?
Exactly.
In a way, I think we were able to bring out your ideas by using visualization. We're going to dig into a couple of details here on using Jason's room as a kind of as a sounding board and get everybody's input. We use predictive isolation using our Studio Float ISO rafts that were developed to separate the rigid framing from the structure and the interior. And that uses silicone in between the two nailer blocks to separate the structure and the interiors. And Jason, you know, when we started your project, the very first thing I think I remember you telling me when I went and measured the place, because it's in the lower level of a residential home in Studio City, was the first instruction was, I want to work all day, all night, at any level, and no one can hear me. I mean, that was kind of it, right? That was one of the most important business parts for you.
Yeah, it's super tough. A lot of people move into a home situation where, you know, to me, I can't work from home. It's tough for me to be motivated. You kind of want to I kind of want to put my shoes on, you know, drive my car, then drive to the studio. So with this house being a rental property, we turned the whole entire house into a studio, 4-room studio. And it gave the ability for the artist to roam around, to not just be in one little tiny lounge, to obviously have a place to stay because it has a bedroom for each studio. And it was a great space, but everybody knows when you're in a residential space, if your neighbors hear anything, you're toast. And yeah, the caveat and the only deal was like, you have to promise me once you build this that no sound will seep out. And I can guarantee you, I mean, we probably put it up, I don't know what the SPL was, like
114 was the point where you still couldn't hear anything with the doors closed or outside of the garage door, which is pretty phenomenal because he's got these double 15 classic Aspergers with double 18 subs on each side that I think when I was testing without Jason in the room, I was able to get about 129 dB in the room without distortion or stress to the system. I don't think most people are listening in that room at that level, but 114 dB with no leakage, I consider a major achievement because most rooms have a hard time keeping bass in. And so the product helps a lot, but also being able to predict what happens when we add these layers. And a lot of my concept is to use science on this part, the predicting it, so that we don't, if we're going to spend the kind of money that Jason was willing to devote to his, you know, getting this isolation and getting a great room, that it didn't fail.
And really, it's the invention of the ISO raft. I mean, I think I was kind of on the very beginning of that.
Yeah.
So with these ISO rafts, I mean, everyone knows how to build a studio. You build a room within a room, and it's floating and all that good stuff. But with these ISO rafts, what they do is they absorb the energy. So not only do you get truth being told to you, you get absolutely no vibration. Because I'm big on anything being in the room that I'm hearing coming from the speakers only. Like I do not want to hear a rattle, a shake from the board, the console, anything, because it throws my ear off. And with these ISO rafts, I mean, as loud as we want to go, and it's still tight, secure. It feels like, you know, the difference between driving in a Honda or like a Mercedes-Benz. It just feels well put together. And these ISO rafts, they use no screws, no nail. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think the interesting thing when we developed that product was, you know, we started testing. I was like, wow, this doesn't let bass go from one part of the block to the other side. So we're able to separate those two things. And we found some other benefits of, like Jason's talking about, like the structural rigidity of the room. But this is something people really miss, is that, you know, you have a subwoofer in a room and it's touching anything. You're actually using that pistonic energy, that motor, to drive your building, the floor, the walls, and that loss actually comes out of the sound system. And so, as you said, we're always going for the direct signal between the speaker and the listener without the reflections and without the room doing something we don't want it to do. And so when you
I like a really dead room. Like I don't like wood. Like I come from the school of Dave Pensado and Dexter Simmons. Like they really have these tight rooms, and what you hear is what you get. Like a lot of people like to, you know, have a lively room, but not I. I see a diffuser behind me. I'm like, put the blanket up. Rafa, give me a blanket.
Yeah,
I'll bring the blankets next time.
you know, diffusers are an interesting topic we can get into more detail on, but, you know, they do introduce high frequency response into a room, so you have to really use them carefully and use the right type of diffuser. Like, I tend to use 3D diffusers instead of 2D because they scatter in all directions versus a 2D, which push the energy back at the listening position. But I think in the isolation component, the other thing that we found is that because no bass escaped, you know, that worked for us in some ways, but there was some things we'll talk about that worked slightly against us until we were able to adjust them using acoustic treatments. This is just some of the visuals of, like, in our process, placing acoustics, you know, what happens after we've already got the acoustic shell up. So we use predictive visualization, some of the stuff we're seeing here, through rendering to see what the room is all about. And Michael, you created this set of drawings to be able to get us in the room. Can you tell me a little about that process? What happens? You start with, how does that start?
So usually when we start the design of the room, the first term came to our mind is the golden ratio. But as a studio designer, I can tell you it's nothing alone. So it's not going to be a golden ratio and you're good to go. So in Malikpur design, we have our golden triangle. I will make our recipes, which is 3 components. The main component, which is, you can see, it's the design itself, the visualization, which goes to the designer and the client who gonna
And the vibe that we were talking
and
about.
the vibe. Yeah, he's saying like he's living sometimes more than 12, 16 hours. So that's mean the visualization and the vibe of the room it's very important. So this is the top of the triangle. The second 2 component is the acoustic, which is the monitors that goes to this room and how it's gonna sound better. And this is what Louis is doing. So we have the monitors, so we have the acoustic. The third component is how we can connect these 2 components together with the structure system from the beginning. So let's say you have a very good golden ratio between the height and the width and the length of the room. You're good to go? No, because that based on the window, the door. You are in the basement, you are in the first floor, the second floor. It's a residential, it's a bricks building, it's a Joyce building. It's about the structure. So it's not just we count the layers of wall structure and we say like we do have a plywood and 3 layers of quiet rock and you're good to go. No, it's about scientists, as Louise and Dave said. So it's numbers. When we put a quiet rock mixed with MLV and sheetrock, we good to go as this high of frequency or this type of frequency with this type of speaker system. Other speaker system or other monitor, or like if it's Atmos system, or it needs a different type of structure. So the sound sounds better from the structure, not from after you build the shell and you said let's evaluate the sound inside the room. So this is our recipe. So visualization, which is we use many of softwares that leads the clients or guide the clients to get the end result before we beginning the project. So he knows how the lighting works, how the fabric wall looks like, how the vibe of the room can change from a tone of color of the light to different tune. So that, I guess, will make also impact for the track you're mixing. So let's say you have a type of music that you need this vibe and I need like this flashing light and this red, blue light, whatever. I'm mixing a different type of track, and I need like soft, warm, cozy atmosphere. So I can change my room to different type of rooms or multifunction rooms. This is for the visualization that Dave's talked about. So we have our software that leads us to go inside the room. You have your camera, open the door, close the door, turn the light on, turn it off. So you have all the vibes that you can get from your room. And we have a different software that evaluate all of that to numbers so we can pick the material. We're going to build our structure system or the shell. And one of the invention of the ISO raft, it's kind of, I will call it like a washer machine. Whatever gonna happen inside the room, it's gonna keep inside the room. So this is like the best value of the ISO raft product, and it's one great element that we use inside the shell we have. So this is, I call it the real golden ratio. It's design, structure, question. So it's not about only numbers and couple numbers, angle the wall, stuff the wall with some fiberglass or a mineral wall, and you're good to go. It sounds different. So it's for initially, well, it sounds good. It sounds good, but when you leave in the room like 12 hours and you visit like another room like Jason's room, you're gonna find the difference.
Well, I think that's a great example, all those things. And one of the things in the visualization, Jason had this idea to have these two lamps hanging, and they didn't make the cut in the final analysis, but in all the working drawings up to a certain point, we had these two hanging chandeliers, and you could see them in the front of the room. It's like, hey, they're going to kind of be in the way. It's like, oh, yeah, we'll leave them there for now. And then by the time we got to the actual build, it was like, no, those are out because they're going to be in the wrong place. But it still helped Jason, I think, to go like this idea he had in his head, he could see it and go, no, that's got to go.
Yeah, we were designing together. So in this software, it's live designing rendering. So I don't have to say like, this is the comments and the notes that come from the clients, and I will lead you like a couple of weeks to change it. No, we have it live. It's a live rendering. So he said, remove this couch, change the light, put the fabric here, change this location of these elements, and we're good to go within a minute and give us the end result at the moment.
I have a feeling that Jason still wants the chandeliers. He's like, that was the biggest disappointment.
I do have a backup version. It is the chandeliers.
I do.
You do.
You can always look at the renderings.
And just on my end of it as like leading this project, when somebody shows me something they want to do and I think that's not an idea I love or I'm concerned about, I have to pick my battles. I have to say like, this is a hot button for somebody. This isn't. I'm going to argue the thing. If it's going to interfere with acoustic performance of the space, I'm going to even argue at a high level.
So I'll start that story
try.
because I know where he's going. So in the building of this room, I wanted to make it as big as I possibly can. You know, you're converting a garage, even though it was a 3-car garage, it's never enough space. You know, you're building a room within a room, and the height and the ratio was to width ratio was definitely not in the golden zone. But you know, through science, because you guys got to really think about it, man. Like it isn't a guessing game if you really look at it. You know, you build a box, say it's 25 by 25 by 25, and you're shooting, you know, white noise from left to right to left, wherever you want to do. It's going to sound the same in every 25 by 25 box. So having someone like Jacoby measure get the room measured, you get the right treatments up, it can save your career, so to speak. You know, to have because we all know as mixers, the most important thing for us, I would say, is our confidence. You know, you walk into a mix, I hope everyone here who is a mixer walks in and is thinking, oh, I'm the greatest mixer in the world, and I'm going to mix the hell out of this record. And that's that. Instead of walking in there, it's like, oh, I hope they like it. You're already defeated. But going to the topic of this room, I wanted a deeper space, but obviously with the front wall with the speakers and the faucet, the outside had these two alcoves, so to speak. And when we started doing the test, you know, it's that first test when you're like, all right, let's hear what it sounds like. And all of a sudden, 40 hertz just came on blazing, and the room wouldn't let it escape. So it felt like the pressure of the bass just pushing your ears and eyeballs in, and I was just like, oh my God, I spent all this money and I got the worst recording studio in the world. Like, no, Dave. Dave looks at me and goes, I fucking told you about those alcoves, man. Like,
That was an argument that we had early on.
What do you want me to do? I was like, but I wanted the space. He's like, well, fuck, we got a problem now. So in his genius, he was, I have an idea. And he had a couple I call them bear traps now because we put my bear brick on top of it. But he had a couple bass traps at exactly 40 hertz in one of his warehouses. We brought it down, we put them in the two alcoves, and it just sucked all that bass up, and it turned my room for me, into the best sounding room I've ever been in. And I've sworn by Larrabee Studio One my entire career. It's probably the best room that I've ever been in, but it's no longer the best room I've ever been with. And it was solved with two bass traps that were now, if you can see them, covered up with fabric to match the room and wood. So it looked like, bear stands for my bear. And, you move it six inches back, it changes the whole sound of the room. You know what I mean? You can literally move it forward and have less bass, move it back and have more bass. So it's almost like a natural tuner of the room, but we like it in the position that it's in, and it turned out to be a saving grace for us.
Actually, I remember I brought over 8 of them, and we first put it we put all 4 on each side into the alcove, and it suddenly
then
sounded
sucked all the bass out.
like gone, 200 hertz, like it was like someone took a filter acoustically
pass.
and just went. It was gone.
Go on the website and actually do this test yourself, so you can load up a room. There's preset rooms there, and actually hear the difference of the before and after.
If somebody wants to find that, where do they have to go?
To our website, jokavi.net.
Yeah, jokavi.net, and you can see and hear the
But
process.
think of how amazing that is. Like, you have your room, and then they shoot your room, and then they say, this is what it's going to sound like once we treat it. Like, come on.
And you can hear the difference, the before and after, and change it as you go along. So you add another panel and see the difference of before and after now, and so on and so forth. So you can keep on. It's an additive process, so you can keep on hearing the difference.
yeah,
Just for the novices, has anybody been into a recording studio and they've seen fabric everywhere, right? So that's what's covering whatever acoustics they have in there. Most of the old school studios, they're relying on insulation and they caught a vibe and so on and so forth. But nowadays in some of these modern studios, there are companies like Jokavi and them themselves that literally scientifically make your room as close to what they feel is perfection. And then, obviously you got to use your ears to take it the rest of the way. But it's so important to have a room to tell the truth. Like,
Well,
it's so important.
And I think the key part of what you're saying too about it is like when you can hear what it's going to impact your listening experience, and there's science behind it. We're never going to get 100% exactly
coming out
from a
of here.
model to the reality, but I think when we tested your room, we were at about 95% of our predicted model, and versus. Let me put up some fiberglass here and put some fabric over it. Everybody's using Roxol, or everybody's using 703. And what people don't totally understand, I think sometimes, is like, just because everybody did it a certain way doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And we found from using different materials like cork and coconut fiber and there's 4 or 5 different types of foam that we use, have different densities and have different signatures. We can then have those products modeled so that when you're looking at this model of the room's performance before any treatments, that we can actually put in these pieces, a bass trap, or what happens when I put the diffuser in, what happens when I, instead of guessing that hopefully this is going to work. And, if our methodology is guessing and hoping, and then it costs the same amount of money actually to guess or get science, in reality, because you're still going to put these materials in. There's still going to be someone hanging it up. There's still someone going to put fabric over it. So guesswork, predictive modeling, we like the science. And it's a lot like the speaker tuning, because I'll speaker tune from my measurements up to a point. And then at some point I got to use my brain and my ears and the client. And the same thing goes when we do these predictive models. Like, here's what the model says, and I'll look at it and say like, yeah, but we're still going to have a little reflection over here that for a guy like Jason can't have a high frequency reflection at his listening side on the right side, and okay, the program says to use all this stuff, but so we still. And it's the same thing with like a plugin, right? Like the plugin says, I need to cut 3 dB. It's like you cut 3 dB, it's like, okay, but now the vocal has no power. Yes, technically, or the same thing with the measurement software. The measurement's telling me that we're 3 dB hot at 2K, and I take out 3 dB at 2K, and it's like, now the vocal sounds like this. And, so the tools are there to get us really close, and then our intelligence, experience, and knowledge is what gets us 100% there. So I think that's, while we use the predictive modeling to guide us, we also use, our experiences and combined experiences of myself, our team, and every time as we go through this process, we find that there are certain things that the model is so incredible at, like low frequency modeling and prediction. Like I went to a studio and they had made these bass traps that took up 3 feet of the back of the room with these labyrinth traps. And when I measured them, they were giving me very weird results. The room had a strange W shape in the bottom end. In other words, it was knocked out at 60 hertz and at 90 hertz and then upstream at the harmonics. And if they could tell ahead of time that that's what those bass traps were going to do, they definitely would have never put them in. And we can get a far better result in 8 inches of mechanical bass traps than you can with 2 feet of labyrinth traps. And guess what? We can also tell you exactly what frequencies they are. We can measure it and say, hey, this room is producing an extra 80 hertz just from the model. Let's make sure that we have an 80 hertz bass trap in there. And that's simplifying it tremendously. I want to take some questions for the guests in our team.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for your time. I just wanted to ask a question for anyone that may feel as though they have an answer for the whole panel. So when you're building a studio and you're trapping all these frequencies in, sometimes there's the challenge of temperature control. I was wondering how you guys tackle that, if that's in your repertoire of knowledge. I know it gets very hot inside of a studio, so I'm wondering how you guys might solve that issue.
It's called air conditioning.
That I'm sure, but like compared to like, are you gonna like treat the vents or anything like that?
Oh yeah, that's another aspect that they have to do. Yeah.
Pricey.
So it doesn't become a noisy environment or uncomfortable. One of the most uncomfortable things for me is the studios where, even big famous studios where the temperature goes from, that and also the variation in temperature. Like there's like a 5 degree variation.
Yeah, it's either hot or
Go
cold.
from
Hot or cold,
hot
that's it.
to cold.
Never perfect.
Yeah.
So to answer that, you need a good HVAC engineer when you're planning the project, because
And that's what we got lucky at. We had a great HVAC engineer, and he picked a great unit that can survive, the California heat. But he actually gave us 2 HVACs for each side of the room. So it really, and to go into what Rafa was talking about, having, the vents making noise. I mean, you don't understand what's going behind the scenes, but they'll have, I don't know, what do you call it? Where the air goes through
the duct.
Yeah, the duct. It'll be damn near a mile long just by the time. So when it comes to your room, it just eases into the room, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? They have,
it's
I don't wanna
basically
call it,
low velocity, high volume. So you want to have a lot of air in the system at a very slow speed. And at your room, Jason, at first we had the noisy diffusers, right? The metal covers on them, and I think we ended up getting custom wood ones made, if I remember correctly.
absolutely.
Thank you, guys.
I'll just say that one other point is inside the ducts, you can also put they're like little mini diffusers that absorb, and they're like triangles so that the air is flowing in there, and it's kind of slowing down the velocity. So the engineer that worked on the project and Jason's and some of the other ones, they use those to kind of just determine how much air can pass through at what volume and so that'll slow down that noise.
Hey guys, so the question that I have is for people who are more novice or intermediate that are trying to acoustically treat their room the correct way, what is the best approach? I mean, obviously hiring like a tuner would be great, but for people who don't necessarily have the funds to hire someone of a professional caliber, what would you advise doing to get the best result?
Well, I have two pieces of advice there. One, the first thing would be to use Joe Covy's free room analysis process. So anybody here, you can go on the Joe Covey website, you can fill out your information, upload picture of the room, give us the dimensions, and just from the dimensions and the room information, we can provide you with the same report you just saw for Jason, and it's going to tell you the solutions. And you can also pepper that with, hey, I have
How much does that report cost?
the report's free.
Think about what he just said. You can send your room to Jacoby. They will measure it for you, send it back, give you the report for free.
And the other caveat is to put in there, hey, this is my budget to treat my room, because Jacoby makes 1,100 products in probably 10 different colors. There's 11,000 SKUs. So it's a lot. It's overwhelming. But and we have things that we have panels that cost $100 and they have panels that cost $1,200. So trying to measure between, and maybe even more, figuring out the budget to get this accomplished. And I think the other component is when it's like setting up your own speakers, there's a few things that I always point my clients to is get a couple 3-inch by 3-inch pocket mirrors, use some painter's tape or console tape to put them over the center of the acoustic area of the center of that speaker. So that's usually the tweeter, or a 3-way might be between the tweeter and the mid-range. Put them up on your console. I use a laser to make sure everything that I have is within a 16th or 32nd of an inch, so that when I'm balancing my speakers, that they're exactly where they need to be. And how do you determine that? Well, when I'm looking at the mirrors, anything I can see in those mirrors, I can hear in the room. So you can hear every reflection. And again, the goal is to get the most direct signal between the speaker and your ear without a reflection. So sometimes that means tilting them down a little, or rarely tilting up, but depending on the speaker height, it's very important that you are balanced between the speakers. And you'd be surprised, a 1/4 inch on each speaker are out of whack, and you're like, I can't get the image right. It's pulling to one side, and nothing changed except that balance. So those are the two things I would do for free.
I would just add one extra thing. It's the distance of the speakers to the back walls. Right? So speaker barrier interference or speaker boundary interference, it's a very real problem that most people just forget about. They just put the speakers up, they put the desk up, and just like Rafa said, moving the desk. And sometimes it's a very small amount. It's like 2 inches, 10 inches. It just makes the whole difference. The sound, the energy that gets out of the monitor that bounces off the back wall, it's going to cancel itself with the image that comes out of the monitor to the front.
Yeah, with my near fields, I don't know what I spent, but I know it was a lot of money for these like matching stands for my console. And when I had them on the stands, they were too far back.
Yeah.
So I put them back onto the console. Now I just got 2 stands just staring at me. And you want them, Warren?
And that's the thing. You're going to have you will have cancellation. There's no two ways about it. That effect exists. Doesn't matter if you put bass traps in the back, if you put absorption, diffusion, whatever it is, you will have some cancellation. You just need to choose which frequencies you're going to lose.
Well, and actually where that cancellation is going to be perceived.
Exactly.
So if we can get no cancellation where I'm sitting in the mix position and all this cancellation is like right behind me, okay, the only downside is if that cancellation is where the client is sitting and they're like, could you turn the bass up? It's like the bass is slamming. No.
Oh, I got a great question. Okay, in my room, you can walk around anywhere in the room, and I haven't asked this of them, anywhere in the room, and it sounds just as good. You don't have to be in the center position. How, Sway?
Okay, so
How?
there's two key pieces here. One is that the way that room is treated is very linear, so that the treatments, yes, we're getting bass out of the corners, which is the most efficient place to absorb low frequency, or the ceiling. We use the ceiling to create a linear response by the front to back and side to side, so that we don't have any hot spots. We don't have any low treatment areas. So the treatments are balanced. We don't just have bass traps in one place. They're kind of interspersed with the high frequency and mid frequency full band absorption. So that's one of the things. The other thing, and this is where Osberger monitors cheat a little bit, is they have 110-degree horizontal dispersion and 70-degree vertical dispersion. And when we're making our model, we actually put that dispersion on the horn and I start by moving them around. I make Michael crazy because I'm like, no, it's got to move just a quarter of an. Oh no, we got to, because at the top reflection of the horn, I can keep that really just below the ceiling by just angling it the right way. So we're not interacting with the ceiling, and it's not interacting with the console surface. So we put the console in the model, as you saw in some of the models. We had the console modeled, and we're putting the horn so that we can determine. And in his room, the console doesn't reflect. Like literally, you could sit at the console, and there's no coherency reflection. Partly because of what he asked me to do, which was to make the console have the shape of the K, which has a very nice rake to it. And with the speaker, if you can imagine 70 degrees coming down, here's the console surface. It's just coming right over the top. We're skipping a console splash, and we're skipping a ceiling splash. And because of the width of his room and that 110-degree angle, we can fill an on-axis response from the back corner or even like the front of the room to the left. If you stand in your room and at the left side of the room, you can hear the right speaker and the left speaker in stereo at the far left corner or the far right corner. And that's all about even absorption and making sure that the bass traps are dispersed properly, not just collected in one area. And I think it's one of the great highlights of your room.
I don't think I've been in a room that goes lower than us. I mean, it
In a
goes
controlled
low, and like when you're sitting in, like if you're sitting in the couch behind me, you'll see all the ports for the subs blowing at you, and it feels like a nice 10-mile-an-hour breeze hitting you. It feels great, and you're like, I've never felt a port hit me like this. So
Yeah,
kudos to you.
Your rooms goes down almost flat to 22 hertz. It's just short of 20 in his room. And I think it's very important to hear like people used to roll off at 80 hertz when they were getting, to print for a vinyl master. We had to roll off somewhere around 80 at maybe a 6 dB or 12 dB per octave, depending on who was cutting it. Today we're printing 20 hertz, whether you heard it or not. You're printing it, right? The format, Pro Tools, whatever DAW converter, 20 hertz is not hard to capture anymore, but it's really hard to hear, very hard to hear, because you need wavelength and room length. And so one of the ways that bass traps help us is that they elongate that space by adding perceived distance in the wavelength by trapping it, not absorbing it. And there's a difference between a bass absorption and a bass trap. So because we're going to displace that energy into friction as opposed to just trying to absorb it into some kind of sponge-like material. Jason's room also on a vibe level, one of the things that struck me, Jason, was you had a very particular taste, and you found this fabric that when you showed it to me, I was like, oh, I've never made a studio that had such an incredibly artistic piece of fabric. It's always like a blue piece, or I want red, or, but he found this Jean-Paul Gaultier fabric, right? That's all of the fabric in the rooms were JPG, but he handed it to me, and it was like a tapestry. So we had to.
It was literally like, I guess you can say, furniture upholstery fabric. It was pretty thick.
Yeah, and I was a little worried about it, but it was one of the things that Joe Cavi started thinking about, and when we started planning it, we realized like we don't need quite as much high frequency damping, because when that very heavy stuff was stretched on the fabric track, it was also going to have an impact on the high frequency perception. But as Jason said, he doesn't like a live room. He likes a little bit deader of a space. So it actually aided us, and it came out with a vibe that I've never seen before. So that really puts him in a space and his clients in a space.
And I have to give that to Skrillex. Like, I never saw anything like that before either. You usually go into a studio and it's sterile, a couple panels, so on and so forth. But when I went into Skrillex room, he had this fabric that I've never seen before, and I was just like, "Where did you get this fabric?" He was like, "The fabric store," and I was like, "Wow, it is that simple." So you're in a room every day, so you kind of want like Rafa and everybody here, you want a vibe. You want to. I remember assisting for numerous of engineers who had that rack of just all vibe stuff. You bring this card in, they have the lights, the bubble lights, the this lights, the that lights, and it's super, super important, especially for your clients. So, with with that being said, having the selection of your fabric, or just, if you're putting panels on your wall, you can fabricate the panels to make them look super, super dope. Same with their speakers. You buy a pair of Asperger's, you can spray paint them any way you want. You can put Louis Vuitton symbols all over it. It's so whatever makes you or changes your room into somewhere that you can create better, I think is super, super important. So that's what went into picking that fabric.
On the panel, Rafa, Cruz, Jason, do you guys have any other questions you want to share or things that come to mind that we haven't touched on just yet?
No, I was actually going to ask Jason, what was your process of moving, from one place to another? Because I know that you were in a different room in transition, right?
Yeah,
In
so
between.
I went from Larrabee for 15 years, and then I transferred to Sphere, which used to be Royal Tone, Linda Perry studio. Then it turned into Sphere, this Italian heir to a billion fortune bought it and spared no expense, and it was a great experience. But when you switch rooms, Sphere is the first week. Then the second week, you're like, oh, I'm starting to understand it. And by the third week, your ears get adjusted. So just remember that. As long as the room is true and tells you the truth, there might be some reflections, there might be some differences, some picadillos, whatever, but your ear will adjust. As long as you're close enough, your ear will adjust. But I there's so many times in my career I thought, I was like, it's over. I have to move my studio, or it's over. The NS10s are no longer available. I got to find a new speaker. But you realize after doing this for a long while, your ears will always guide you the right way as long as you put yourself in a room that's telling your ears the absolute truth. I mean, I cannot tell you how important that is. Some of the greatest mixers in the world mix in a room or mix on headphones. And because their ear can hear everything they need to hear on headphones, they're some of the best mixers in the world. All the EDM guys mix on headphones while they're jet setting to the next place that they need to go. So it's super, super important. I think all of us have probably done this once, where we pulled up to a studio and we're like, oh, this is some bullshit. And we put our headphones right on.
Yeah, it has happened before, unfortunately.
So one of the things that we did along the way was we measured Larrabee. We took a lot of measurements of Larrabee's speakers, and I took measurements of
Don't tell nobody.
Sorry. Cone of silence, guys.
Nobody's listening.
Warren, when you broadcast this, but we took a picture of the acoustics of the room, but I also measured like speaker height, the console positioning. Like, I tried to understand how Jason had been listening for 15 years in that spot. And then when he moved...
Oh, and I'm terrible. I listen off axis. So I'm a right ear guy only. Like, I'm not in front of the console like this. I'm off to the right. Always been. Don't ask me why. I followed Dave Pensado. He did it, so I thought that was the way to do it. And then when you try to adjust back to the middle, you're like... So after every mix, I put the headphones on. Yeah, seems about right, and put it off. But I'm a right ear guy.
I actually took measurements from where his right ear was going to be, and I took the on-axis response and the off-axis response and understood the relationship. And it was mostly to collect this data so that when we built his room that we could see what that looked like. I mean, Cruz, you're going around all the time.
Yeah.
When you get into a room, is there one thing you do to try to get yourself a reference point to the closet vocal and the bedroom with the mattress that we stuck up against the wall? And, like, what do you do to try to put yourself in the spot?
Situation.
So you're going to get this vocal.
Yeah.
Is it like, I don't care what the speakers are. I got my Beyer 700s, or I got my I guess I'd ask that question of all three of you. Is there a magic headphone for the three of you?
Not really. I like the Slate headphones. I like the Audio Technicas. Meek listens to Beats. I like the click in these, so I might use these.
I use Beats because all the clients use Beats.
Yeah, Beats is like, if we go to a studio and I forget his headphones, he might not even record. It's that serious. And so,
that's getting the artist comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
How do your comfort work? Do you,
Yeah, well, mine is I'm easy. Like I'm again, as long as I can get like a clean vocal, you know, depending on what the room is, if it's a proper room and I can actually do some mixed stuff, you know, but if it's our typical flow, like I mean, right now I'm mostly in his apartment space, and we've kind of converted into like this really cool. I mean, you helped us try to salvage it as best as we could in terms of, you know how artists
small New
are.
York bedroom and
Artists will spend all this money on jewelry, but then you're like, hey, a couple grand, we'll put some acoustics in here, it might be a vibe, and they're like, eh.
that's funny how that works. How about you,
Yeah.
Jason? You have a headphone that you love that you're dialed into?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry standard right now is the Audis.
Yeah.
I'm very, very intrigued and excited to try out Manny's 500s. I heard they're the toast of the town, so I'm eager to. I spoke to the guy today, and hopefully he'll have those sent out. But I don't remember the model number. Is Mike around? Mike, what model number of the Audis do I use? The 300s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They sound incredible, and they're very.
just don't use them on the plane.
No.
Yeah, well, they're open back, so
Oh, yeah, there you
everybody it sound like you're in a recording studio with the mains on.
There you go. How about you, Rafa?
Well, I use the Audis too. I have the LCD 1X. I think it is. I have Manny's. I think they actually sound very, very good. But I use many other ones over the years. I use the Sennheisers, the
Yes.
HDs. They're like
Which
softer
one?
sounding HD 650s or
Yeah,
something like
so
that.
good.
But I use so many over the years. Like Jason was saying, it's all about getting used to your tools also, you know. And at that level, you know, when you find something that's really, really good, it's just a matter of also getting used to it and learning what you get out of them. So
Is there a favorite track that you put up? All three of you guys. Is there something you use to kind of find home and say, if I hear this track this way, I know what I'm listening to?
Jason's it.
Going bad. Going bad.
No, seriously. I mean, the kind of low end that he gets, it's unreal. I mean, where it sits is like something that hopefully I'll learn one day.
Well, I've definitely integrated his playlist into mine. So, you know, thank you, Jason, for that.
Wait, I'm drawing the blank now. Mike, where you at again? What's my my go-to reference, Meek? Best mix I ever did.
Dangerous for
Dangerous.
sure. Fire mix.
Bro.
Oh my God. Me
Yeah,
and
I play
Guru-
that. I play that, and I just sit back and go like, you
Yeah.
know, wow. Like I
he
play
killed
that
that.
when I think
Killed
I'm
that.
done with the mix,
Yeah.
and I'll play that reference and be like, yeah, I'm not done with the mix.
Yeah. That mix is
That's
amazing.
killer. So everybody download Dangerous into your reference library, because I use that myself, and it has so many things I love about it. The way
Yeah.
the snare drum is crafted, it's very upfront, but yet it doesn't interfere with the vocal. The bass hits in a way that only Jason seems to be able to deliver.
Yeah.
And,
Vocals
you know,
are great.
I have
man,
180 songs in my playlist, and I'm always adding to it. And some of them I've listened to 1,000 times. Some I've only listened to 10 or 20 times. And the weird thing for me is like I use this track so I can wait for the snare drum to come in with the guitar on like Gravity from John Mayer, and then I use like Beyonce's Partition because those drops in the beginning of go from like 200 down to 20, and I can hear as I'm listening to those drops. This is a good one for you too. If the sound moves away from you, you're missing something. And if it's moving towards you, there's too much of it. And at least if you can reference that and figure out like, oh, my room produces too much 120, don't mess with 120 and start cutting everything, because it may just be your room doing it.
Most likely it will be.
And I like to reference across all genres, even though a lot of people know me in this hip hop and R&B and dance. But I'll put up Greg Howe Child's Play, which is this guitar fusion thing, because it's got this like incredibly glassy guitar that is on the verge of too bright. But if it hurts, then I got too much high end. If it's not glassy enough and it's not poking through, there's not enough of it. Some of the tracks that Jason turned me on to, Mamacita, that you did, the Black Eyed Peas track, it has this incredible punch to it that moves. It's got emotion in it that like almost feels like everything's moving. So those are some of the things. We're obviously a little past our time, and I appreciate everybody, staying in. We've obviously gotten into the Q&A. and I really appreciate that you paid attention to us. And Jason, Cruz, Rafa, it's a pleasure always working with you guys.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate you guys for staying
and-
too.
We're just here to make sure you kids don't f this shit up. This thing we called engineering, we really are passionate about it.
I think that's about the best thing I've ever heard today. So thank you so much, guys.